Okay, so good afternoon and thank you for joining us today for the Australian Research Council Industrial Transformation Research Program, which we'll refer to as ITRP, 2023 Grant Opportunity Webinar prior to the opening of the ITRP 23 program scheme on Friday the 21st of October, and documents will all be available in Grant Connect. My name is Robert Munn and I'm the Executive Director for Engineering and Information Sciences here at the Australian Research Council. And in the moment, I'll go through some housekeeping introductions, but just confirming anyone from everyone that they're able to hear us. Right. Firstly, excellent, thank you. Firstly, I'd like to begin by acknowledging the traditional owners of the country throughout Australia and pay my respects to elders past, present, and emerging, and I extend that respect to any Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people present here with us in the video Zoom today. Before we start, I'll go through a few housekeeping items. Note, we'll be recording today's webinar, so let us know by the chat if you have any objections to that being recorded. If you have any technical issues, please use the chat function. And if you have any difficulties with sound throughout the webinar, you can either let us know through the chat function. It's in the bottom of your screen. But that should essentially only be used for any technical issues that you have. Use the Q&A button at the bottom of the ribbon if you have any questions that you wish to raise with us. We'll attempt to go through all of those in the webinar. Any that we don't, we will follow up afterwards in FAQ. And if you have any questions after this one, please email the NCGP mailbox and the ARC staff will respond by email. If you do drop out of the webinar at any stage, you should be able to rejoin it by using the same link you used to join in the first instance. If you do require assistance, you could ring 02 6287 6600 and press 1 to get through to the NCGP staff who can assist you. As I noted, we'll be compiling the questions and answers from this webinar, and they'll be released in fax when the grant opportunity opens on the 21st of October 2022. And we'll also circulate the recordings and slides from this session. And that will include additional information slides. Now, on to introductions. First, the guest speakers. I'll announce them all for you. We have Professor Chiara Bector-Metti, who will be joining us from the US, but she hasn't quite joined us on yet. She's the principal lead of Lead Technology Partners. We have Professor Sally Grass, who's a Research Hub Director for the ARC Research Hub for Digital Bioprocesses, and Professor Lawrence Meager, who is a Training Center Director from the ARC Training Center for Cell and Tissue Engineering Technologies. From the ARC, we have Liz Fisher, our Director in Major Investments. And we also have a number of ARC staff joining today and staff supporting and running the webinar. Right, I'll now commence our presentations, which will start with myself and Liz, and then we'll be followed by presentations from our guests, and then we'll have the Q&A. And our guests will hopefully be remaining for most of that, as long as they can before their other commitments drag us away. So we'll just commence the presentation. All right, let's get sharing happening. Okay. All right, to give you an overview, we'll basically overview the schemes where the ITRP sits, give you your indicative dates, noting that these are the ARC dates, and your institution may have slightly different ones. Go through the selection process, assessment and eligibility, things that the ARC considers a successful grant to contain, and then we'll have presentations by our guest speakers, Chiara, on her perspective and considerations preparing your application and tips for working with industry involvement, and then the two Centre Director presentations on preparing an application and their experiences of the process, followed by the questions. Our National Competitive Grants Program, the slide has changed since many of you may have seen it, because we've now added the industry fellowships underneath the linkage program. The National Competitive Grants Program, and it's important to remind all of your partners, it is a competitive program. Some industry partners are somewhat surprised by that. It consists of the Discovery Program with our Discovery Fellowships, projects, Discovery Indigenous, and the Linkage Program. Linkage we define as engaging with people outside and organisations outside of the Australian academic environment. It contains Centres of Excellence, linkage projects, special research initiatives, the new industry fellowships, the linkage and equipment program, and the ITRP. Boxes are approximately a representation of the annual funding that we provide to each one of those. The ITRP scheme itself consists of two sub-schemes. It consists of the Industrial Transformation Research Hubs, which we generally refer to as just straight as research hubs. These are focused on building capability between the universities and external partners, and the Industrial Transformation Training Centres, which are focused on building capacity building of that initial relationship, building that understanding. So they've got two different foci, and they really do need to be considered which is the appropriate scheme for you to apply for your objective of outcomes and for the state and capacity of the partnerships that you actually have and are planning to build. Yeah, I said, capability building is all about making a change to that industry sector. Capacity building is all about building the potential and capability of the sector to utilize those outcomes. So, the objectives, research hubs. We want to actually build collaborative projects between the university and organisations outside of the higher education sector, and organisations for us is the industry partners, as well as community groups, as well as not-for-profits and NGOs. And we want them to focus on cutting-edge research in new technologies and its application and its potential to make change. We want to leverage your national and international investment in targeted areas, and those are indicated by the priorities. The training scheme is slightly different. The training scheme's goal is to support the development and training of high degree research candidates and postdoctoral researchers. We want them to undertake, as well as the research training, understanding of how to work with that industry, the needs of those particular industry groups, and what is needed to be successful in that particular space. We want to actually build and enhance that collaborative relationship between the universities and organisations outside of the higher education sector. And we want to build the capabilities and capacities of the industry and other end users in that industrial transformation priority area to make use of all of the research done in the academic space. We have a set number of priorities, and the applications must address at least one of them. And we support the university-based researchers to work with the industry in the identified priority areas. Current priority areas are listed on the screen. They're the same as last year, and an application must address one or more of the industrial transformation priorities, noting that, like anything, applying to more is not better. Apply to the most important ones and identify where you exist. It helps us identify the correct correct assessors for your particular application. From an ARC perspective, here are the key dates. We'll open the grant opportunity on the 21st of October. It will close on the 15th of December. Noting the requests not to assess close on the 1st of December. Make sure you're available in the rejoinder period between the 10th and the 24th of March next year, with an anticipated announcement date as per the screen in July, August next year. Our current funding available for the individual applications is set at a maximum of $5 million over 5 consecutive years for research hubs and training centres. As I mentioned earlier, note that many of your administrating orgs will have earlier deadline dates for initial submission for their screening purposes, but those are the ARC final closing dates. Key documentation that you need to pay attention to is the grant guidelines. There are some minor changes. The grant agreement kit, the establishment toolkit helps give you some guidance on what the selection advisory committee itself will look for. The instructions to applicants give a whole range of useful tips. And there's also the frequently asked questions, which will be updated. If you're registered on Grant Connect, it will remind you, send a reminder whenever that particular document is updated or any other ones. When you're building your application, consider how you're going to implement the relevant ARC policies as a training centre or a research hub. In the first instance, if you have any questions about any of that documentation, please approach your research office and then they'll contact us if required. When considering the priorities, do approach your stakeholders for their views on your application, how it fits with those priorities, where it goes. Note that the industry growth centres have become independent entities during 2022. So unlike in previous rounds, we will not be approaching them for specific comment on the applications on how it fits their priorities, because we can't do that for every single one of the priorities. While operational industry growth centres, they're still there, and they are able to provide advice to potential applicants as for the previous rounds, and they'll promote the ITRP through their network of industry partners, and they can help you potentially find partners and so forth. We encourage applicants to engage with the relevant growth centres or other stakeholder groups, because they can certainly help you making more connections and help in the preparation of your application. As noted in the previously, there are no changes to the priority area. The changes to the application form. There's a consolidation of the research opportunity and performance evidence questions from the previous forms into a streamlined template, which is only for the key personnel. And there is a clarification of the national interest test statement expectation for the applicants. Statistics for the past few rounds. As you can see, we receive around 20 to 25 applications for training centres, and about half to 2/3 that number for the research hubs, with appropriate success rates. And as you can see, they're spread across successes, spread across a significant range of different disciplines. They're not, but the discipline selection being the lead focus of them. Okay, so that's the background of the scheme itself, and we'll talk a little bit about the selection process and the assessment criteria. Selection process is the standard ARC one. You submit the application. We conduct peer review. The Selection Advisory Committee makes its recommendations. We also confirm eligibility, conduct our foreign interference due diligence, and review the national interest test. And the CEO considers all 4 of those elements when making the recommendations to the Minister, with the Minister providing the final approval. Peer review itself plays a critical role. Applications are assessed by detailed assessors, generally between 3 and 5, and a selection advisory committee that's composed of general assessors. The general assessors are a mix of academic and industry, roughly 50-50. Many of the academic assessors have current and past directors of ITRP grants. The industry ones are a range of people who have worked closely with researchers from an industry perspective. So they're a mix of technical directors, research facility leaders, and so forth, but have worked closely. They look at it from an industry perspective. Does it look up well as a solid proposal? Does it provide that guidance and training capacity for the training centres for building that capacity in the both partners? Or is it actually transformative for the sector itself? Have you considered all of the end users, the regulatory requirements, the social license, all those facets? They look at it very much as a business proposal. The academics focus heavily on the research program. Is it innovative? Is it new? Is it excellent? They focus on that research excellence. So it's a combination of the two that you need to match and meet. And it's important to remember when you're writing it for those experts, on that panel, only maybe 2 people will be intimately aware of your particular area of research. We will be asking at least 3 general assessors to make that assessment. So you make sure it's readable by someone who's highly educated and understands your business proposal and the research as well, in order to identify the fit, the form, and where you're going. Detailed assessors will provide an in-depth assessment as per normal. That'll be entered in the RMS, and they'll provide comments and scores against each of the selection criteria. You'll be able to read those comments and submit a rejoinder. My recommendation on the rejoinder is always to address any issues raised by the detailed assessors, but recognize that that rejoinder is the last thing that the Selection Advisory Committee will be reading. So remember, it's effectively your final pitch to the Selection Advisory Committee of why this proposal you're putting forward is important, why it needs to be done by now, what it will achieve, and why you're the right team. So it's really important to consider that one. So at the actual meeting itself, the general assessors will go through every application and select which applications should be recommended for funding to the CEO. And the CEO will then make recommendations to the Minister of Education, who will decide which research hubs and training centres will be allocated funding under the NCGP. The assessment criteria are as follows on the screen. Investigators and their ability to deliver the program that they're talking about, 20%. Project quality and innovation, 30%. Feasibility and commitment, 20%. And the benefits, 30%. Read the details and the dot points under the criteria and address them all. And as I said, the ITRP Establishment Toolkit gives you some more tips and tricks for the design of the training centre or research hub. So remembering it is a business proposal that contains a research program is the best way to think about it when you're preparing this application. Eligibility criteria. The named participants is the training centre or research hub director, who has to be an eligible CI from the administering organisation. Chief investigators, as per normal, at least 1 CI from the admin organisation, at least 1 from each other eligible organisation that's participating. Partner investigators, there must be at least 1 PI from each partner organisation. And there are the normal range of organisations. And I cannot emphasise enough, each partner organisation must have at least 1 PI. The proposed director must commit at least 50% of their time to the training centre research hub activities and thus must be employed by at least 50% of the time by the admin organisation at the time of commencement. And if successful, they must continue to be employed for the project activity period. And unsurprisingly, must meet the eligibility criteria to be a CI. Chief investigators have to be at least employed for 20% of the time at an eligible org or have an appropriate honorary academic appointment at the eligible organisation. They must reside in Australia for at least 50% of the project activity period and can't be doing a higher research degree. Partner investigators, essentially those who do not meet the eligibility to be a CI. Okay, so what does the ARC consider when an application, and what does success look like? For these ones, I'll hand over to Liz to talk a bit on these ones.
Yeah, thanks, Robert. So the really important, these are just a summation of the really critical things to think about for successful applications. When the slides are sent out to you later, we will have another half a dozen slides that capture in more detail what this looks like. But the first critical thing is an integrated research program with really transformational outcomes. So the description of the project title, the themes that you're talking about, the objectives of your project is very much about the outcomes, not the research methodologies. And your themes and the structure of it, the governance structure, is highly integrated. It should not look like a network of singular projects or independent silos of activity. So that's the first one. Obviously, having a great director with relevant experience and skills, but importantly, also having a great leadership team associated with that director as well. So it's leading a team, but also an executive leadership team that we're looking for as well. Now, sometimes I get asked about track record. There are directors that have worked in academia and industry. So as long as they are fit for purpose with their experience and skills, it doesn't matter what their career actually looks like. Also, a highly effective administration and operations. So a good business manager is part of that process. A lot of hubs and training centres have about 7 people employed, or at least they ask for those positions in the grant applications and they recruit later. But really think about, this is a research entity, so you do need to have good governance and operations and have that clearly explained in your application. And I'll talk about this a bit more in a moment, but really think about the translation pathway and co-design that with your partners and their end users, not treating just the partners as your end users, with a really strong focus on strategic opportunities and identification and management of risks. So what does success look like? But also, what are the risks look like? What are the gaps look like? And that's when you actually build a translation pathway of short-term, medium-term and long-term outcomes as well. Very important to do, and we'll show you a slide in a minute how to do that. Really, the integration of your collaborators is really important. There is a temptation when you're starting to write a grant application that you start off with one-on-one discussions or project one-on-one discussions, but really what you need is that the partners actually understand it's an integrated program, even though they may, and shared IP arrangements or a shared collaborative platform that they're operating on. Anything that looks or is communicated as if it's a one-to-one arrangement with partners is also considered to be unfit for the scheme. Inevitably, when you're talking about translation pathways and you are walking that pathway of 5 to 10 years in potential successes and risks, you then come across the need for potential social sciences involvement and therefore an interdisciplinary design. Research that addresses the industry needs, but very much with the industry end users in mind as well. And there'll be things like regulatory framework, organisational psychology, and I'm just making up a few. You'll see what I mean when you design a translation pathway, that you have to go past the partners and there will be risks that you have to identify and address, and having HAS disciplines in that space is helpful. Obviously, particularly with the training centres, but it really goes for both, having a program of really innovative training for a future research workforce, for future research workplaces, not just today's recruits and today's workplaces. Also think about how you would address gender equality and diversity and team building in that sort of national research entity framework. Really be innovative in your student placements. Don't just say, I'm going to put a student with an organisation for 12 months and leave them there. Think about how you do the placements of students across the translation pathway with different partners along the way, so you maximise their experience and skill sets as well. Obviously, a highly integrated and excellent form of governance as well. Think about your advisory committee, making sure the members are future focused and really addressing that strategic advice and vision that you're looking for to support the executive leadership of the grant leadership as well. Make sure your budget is feasible. ARC will only pay for certain things. Yeah, and for instance, in training centres, it's all salaries and stipends. So partners bring in project costs. Make sure that your budget is integrated with the different sources of funding and make sure it's fit for purpose. And also set aside some money for strategic funding to incentivise any success and also to address any risks that come up as well. And also consider things like small competitive grants that might be useful for early career researchers where they're onto a good thing in their research. You want to reward good behaviour in terms of finding that innovation of the research. And as I said, we'll also send you more tips in the PDFs of the slides later. So Robert, did you want to add anything to that?
I think you've covered it well with what I've covered previously.
Okay.
Next.
Okay, so this PowerPoint slide is really just to help you think about moving your negotiations with your partners into a translation pathway. So on the top left-hand corner, you see universities and partners. When you start building up an application for ITRP, you'll have a number of universities in mind and partners, and it will look like a network. But what you have to do is distinguish which partners, and that goes for universities as well, that are absolutely essential to build capability for your grant. Like if those organisations are not there, you'll be questioned by the detailed and the SAC members why they're not there. So they are bringing unique infrastructure, expertise, and excellence to some degree in that space. The next set of partners is delivery partners. So they're the ones that will take piloting of research outputs or technologies, and they'll go out into field and actually pilot things and then bring it back and feed it back into the research program. And it may also be organisations that provide a window to communities or a window to like associations for farmers, for example, where they are using them as a portal. Then you have partners that will take the research outcomes and either commercialise or they will adopt things in a much broader scale. And they may be named or they may be on your advisory committee giving advice to you along the way as well. And then right at the other end is end users. And they're the ones that are actually receiving the products at the end of what you are proposing. And they may say to you, that's a really good product and thank you for that. And in other occasions, they'll say, that's not what I wanted. Or that has a social impact, an environmental impact. It might have a social license issue. You need to build in your end users, whether it's as partners or whether it's in your advisory committee, to make sure you're getting fit for purpose advice about ethics, regulatory framework things. All those things are really important. You need to build that in because you're building a translation pathway along with all those partners. Thanks, Robert. Anything for you to add to that as well?
Nope. Next slide.
Okay. So this is just an example of what a good governance framework might look like. The things to notice, of course, is the director is in the executive leadership team. You've got an executive management committee that will form, you know, it might have theme leads or node leads. And they're the core business. They are the delegates running the decision making across the investment. You've also got a business manager, and you will have additional admin support as well. And you may have 1 or 2 deputy directors that might take particular points of activity of the training centre or the hub and leading in that space as well. The critical thing in terms of design of governance as well is that we like themes that cross over nodes and cross over organisations as well, because what you're looking at is the outcomes driven themes of the ITRP grant. And you should be able to have nodes and organisations moving across the different themes in the delivery. Theme 1 will feed into theme 2, theme 3 will feed into theme 1, and then there's that form of integration. And so it doesn't allow for like a theme going to a organisation, because then structurally you will start to look like slices of the pie where all the organisations drag out their part of the money, and then it looks like a network. The other thing we'd like to suggest is that if you do have training centres, and this is not just training centres, but it's early career researcher committees. So you might have a small committee of representatives of students and postdocs that can actually feed information back to the executive about professional development and training, unique placement opportunities, really important strategic or technical skills that they are needing, but also workforce incorporation as well. And they might organise conferences, they might organise workshops for you. So it's building up that capability and a feedback loop. And you can also have them as like proxies within the executive committee meeting as well. And my comment before about the strategic funds, you can have a little small competitive grants program that encourages early career researchers to do amazing things with the research work that they're doing. Did you want, and of course you've also got the advisory committee as well, missed that. Sorry about that. The advisory committee is really about getting future focused advice across your translation pathway. Now, it might be scientific advice, technical advice, legal advice. It might be commercial advice, workforce development advice, and it needs to be fit for purpose. And you also need to refresh the membership along the way. They are your ambassadors and your champions, and they are also the ones that will inform you that your research work is really leading and that's right across the translation pathway, or there's something that's not working or something that needs to change or actually stop. They are there to act as a sounding board as well. They are not a board, they are there for advice. Robert, did you want to add anything more?
Yeah, I think the only thing I'd really add is the opportunity there, especially for training centres, to think about what unique capabilities you can give to those ECRs and MCRs, all those things that you wished you learnt when you were at their stage of their career, so that it would have made it easier going forward, that understanding of how to deliver things, the importance of all of the group activities, and giving them useful things that they can put on their CVs as they go forward to say, I have done this, I have helped organise small competitive grant schemes, I have helped assess, and so forth, is particularly important for them.
Yeah, thanks, Robert. And so universities will have an array of standard kind of professional development, which the ARC won't pay money for, but the ARC money can be useful for highly specialised or unique training opportunities, which Robert has mentioned there. Robert touched on this before in terms of talking about peer reviewers and SAC members, but there's some audience considerations in who you're writing the grant application for. So firstly, the application title needs to be not the ARC Training Centre of my favourite research methodology. It needs to be the training centre for a particular research outcome, so it's clear what the success will look like. Don't use acronyms or question marks. It should be a really accurate reflection of what the outcomes are proposed to be. Hence, your workshopping is really important to do. The other thing is, have you got all the critical partners and disciplines in place to ensure you've got that sort of highly collaborative research and training, and being able to translate those outcomes right across the TRLs or technology readiness levels? It's through your partnerships that you do that. To what extent the research addresses one or more of the industry transformation priorities, and I won't say anything further than that. Robert covered that quite well before. But you do need to think about how you pitch the description in sufficient detail for your detailed assessors. They will be industry people, they will be academic people who will understand your disciplines, understanding though that these grants are often interdisciplinary in nature. And they are there to say, is this really frontier research? Is this feasible? Is this really shifting the field? And they are the barometer, and industry is involved in that as well, industry experts as well. And so they're saying, is this feasible? Is it transformational? Then that information goes to the selection advisory committee. And as Robert said, you may have one, you may have two people that are in your field that will understand it, but not all of them will understand it. So you've got to make sure that you're writing for an audience where it's plain English, and that you're writing a research entity, not a 6-digit code description for a discovery project. And they may not be discipline experts, but they need to still understand it as well. So that's really important to focus on the language that you use for those two audiences. And then finally, you've got the national interest test statement. And so when you think about the summary that describes the project, that might be the outcomes within the grant period. When you're writing a statement that is for the audience being the general public, the CEO and the minister, it's actually saying in a line of sight, what does success look like at the end of the grant and beyond the grant? And that's the societal benefits, the economic, commercial, environmental, social, and or cultural things as well. Making sure that you write it in really plain English. It is a very different audience, and share it with people that are outside of your fields to make sure that they clearly understand it as well. Did you want to add anything more to that, Robert?
Noting the time, I think I'll just remind and emphasize that, remember, the application is a business proposal to achieve industrial transformation, is not that it contains a research project. It is not just a research project. So that's always to be borne in mind when prepping it.
One thing I would add, a common mistake for training centres is they do gratuitous details of the research program and then say at the end, and yes, there'll be some students too. As Robert said, the training centres is very strongly focused on the future research workforce with a research program. There's a temptation to say, here's a deeply detailed, looking like a research hub type of description, and then having students as a secondary factor. Very important.
Okay. Yeah, I think Liz and I have talked enough, and we can go on to the important people here that we're here to hear. So first off, from dark USA at the moment, since it's night over there, is Chiara.
Thank you.
Chiara, I'll let you share your screen and stop sharing mine.
Thank you very much. Okay, so I think you need to stop first.
Like that?
Great. Yeah. Okay.
It's looking very dark there.
It is. It is getting very late. And I just want to make sure that I've got the correct one. Yep. Okay. So hopefully I am sharing the screen. And now what I think might happen, unfortunately, is if I go to slideshow, please let me know if can everyone still see the screen? Yes? Okay, great. Thank you. Well, thank you so much for having me. Now, I understand that there may be a couple of people online that have seen this presentation before, so hopefully you're just storing up all your questions for later. And this is a bit of a refresher for you. But the topic of the discussion is collaborating with industry and the importance of translation and interaction between industry and applicants. So what we're going to go through is a bit around when you're thinking about industry, their needs analysis, not your needs analysis, but theirs, the preparation that you need to go through with industry, some structuring and pre-legal requirements that you need to consider to make sure that there's alignment to get to the best outcomes. Because what you want to ensure is that expectation meets reality. There are a lot of times where you're so eager to get industry involved that there might be an oversell or gaps in discussions. So just silent, and assumptions are made, and they might be the wrong assumptions, which then lead to problems in the contracting in the future. And we'll talk about ways that you can address those now. You know, what we don't want is the elephant in the room, because that will just create problems later. Okay, so if we think about what a partnership looks like, today's businesses, they know what they need. They need to embrace innovation. They need to think about growth, but they don't know how. A lot of these industries will be in older, more established industries. They know they need to be part of success for the future, but they're not sure how to do it. They know that industries are part of it, but not sure how to engage. It's your role to smooth that path for them. So, universities are committed to research being the best of the best, national priorities, and addressing key challenges. So how can you best align what you want with the industry needs? And that's, if you can do that, you will have an absolutely fabulous training center or research hub. Okay, so in the mind of the university, they want to collaborate with leading experts, which is why you're all here today, access to great facilities, which is why we're all working together across multiple organizations to build those networks. Education was mentioned a number of times, especially as related to the training centers, because it's about the best capabilities and getting the best talent into industry, which is critically important, and establishing those long-term relationships, because it's not just about this training center or research hub. It's about what happens next. Is it a CRC? Is it a center of excellence? So what are those relationships that you're establishing for that long-term future? Don't just think about this grant prospect. Think about the next 10, 15 years and where you want it to get to. And I think Liz mentioned TRL levels before. You're going to get to a certain TRL level. What's going to get you to market? And that's where I always think about. And what does industry think about? Industry's got a very long list. And that list is not just about today. It's about the products that are already on market and what they're facing with their staffing issues, what they're facing in inflation, global trends, how they actually support their existing products. So the last thing they think about is R&D. Unfortunately, for a lot of organizations, R&D is not on the critical path. You need to show them why it's on the critical path, why it always needs to be part of their organizational strategy into the future. Because if they stop now, it's going to create a gap for them in the future. We saw this in the global financial crisis in the mining industry, where they basically stopped all research and development, and it created problems where they then had to rehire, reassess, and reevaluate where they go. And it probably put them behind by 5 to 10 years just by taking a 2 to 3 year hiatus. So it's ensuring that industry knows this is about future-proofing those organizations. Okay, so how do you get alignment? And I'll talk about this a lot because you're in that discussion period. You've got a great idea. You think that you've got a research hub or a training center that industry should want, but industry is going to want to know, what am I going to get out of it? how is this valuable to me? And having those discussions around the shared vision, transparency of outcomes, and clear goals and governance is important to get that final buy-in and get them to sign on the dotted line. So how do you do this? I would suggest workshop. So casual conversations, get everyone around the table, just whiteboard what is important to each of the different parties and what is the outcome they expect. Because you know what you want to create, but they may influence you to create something better, more meaningful, and that has greater longevity into the future. So also keep an open mind about who wants what, where, and when. And it may become important to have those difficult questions first around intellectual property. It may mean getting their lawyers involved, hopefully not, but intellectual property is something that we'll talk about in just a moment, because it is important to set expectations. And write it down. You'll have multiple discussions. I've been part of 2 research hubs as a prospective participant, and I can tell you there's a lot of information that flows back and forth and a lot of chats, but have I been heard? I don't know if I've been heard as a prospective participant. So write it down, go back to the prospective participant. You know, how do you want to be involved? What is your role? What is your contribution? What do you get? What do you expect to get out of it? Because that will then help you to structure what the final product looks like, what the final training center or hub looks like. Right? And how do you avoid pitfalls? I guess it's the reverse of really of what I've just said. Making sure that there's clear objectives. So you've had discussions, you think you know what you want to do, put it on paper, send it back to everyone. Ensure that there's still alignment and you haven't biased what you want to create based on one participant that may alienate others. Is everyone still involved? You may have spoken to an industry partner 3 months ago. You don't know what's changed within that industry partner. Make sure that they're still engaged and wanting to be involved, and that they understand the end game. If you're feeling uncomfortable, ask why. Ask why 3 times, because the first time you're not going to get the answer you want. The second time you'll get an answer that they might think you want, but the third time you'll get to what their actual critical needs are. So keep delving until your gut tells you you've got the answer that you want. And important and appropriate costing for the activity. This is critical because in-kind, cash contributions, matching, for some industry partners, this is new to them. For a lot of them, they would have done this before. So just make sure that everyone understands what the expectations are, and then also understand who the delegate is for signing. You could be having some really interesting conversations, but you're not actually talking to the person that's going to fund this engagement. So ensure that you have either the right people in the room or know who has the influence over the final decision. Now, I like this slide because this is the discussion that we have before we start talking about intellectual property. So an industry partner is going to think about their company in multiple different ways, and that is going to influence their IP ownership. So they've got a company where activities are either core, critical, or a commodity. If it is core, they're going to want to produce it, they're going to want to own it, because this is what gives them their competitive advantage. If it's critical, but it's not core to who they are, such as a mining company needs a piece of analysis equipment, it's critical to what they're doing, but it's not core to their business. So they'll want to partner with people that can produce that equipment for them, or provide them staff that can do this, or training centers that can provide associations where these activities can be done. That is important because that's where ownership may not be with the company. commodity, they want to buy it in. They don't care. That means that what's being created is not of value. They just want to make sure someone does it because it's important to them. So you may get an industry partner that something within that research hub is absolutely core, but something else might be critical or commodity. That might change the IP ownership. So you have to think about flexibility on what they want and what they want to protect. It is not a one size fits all. And that's absolutely important. It's not one size fits all because we're talking about long-term programs with multiple projects. So you can't just say it's going to be the same for everyone in the center and every participant. So intellectual property, it does need to be clearly articulated upfront, and it could be at this stage just principles. What are the principles around ownership and access, which can be completely different? An owner might not be the one that commercializes. So you have to think about who needs to use it for what purpose and why, and how the partners are going to benefit. They're feeling like they are a major contributor to this. They are a partner in this. What is their benefit going to be? What reward are they going to get out of it? The next thing is who's the best party to commercialize. This is important, and this is something that actually the federal government is considering right now as part of the HRDIC IP framework, is who actually is the commercialization partner and why are they the best group that's capable of doing that. You need to think about this with your partners, especially where there are partners that may be working in the same space. And there might be conflict or perceived conflict that you need to manage. And how do you best manage that? And then the other is how do you manage costs? As far as training centers, what comes up in the questions that we get asked sometimes is around student IP. How will that be treated? Universities such as the University of Queensland, I believe, the university owns student IP. The majority of other universities, the students own their IP, so there need to be arrangements that put in place. So just think about that when you're writing your statements about student engagements, because that will need to be thought about, and those answers will need to be in your application. Okay, sorry, I have written this. Oops. Sorry, my slide went a bit scale, but I'll tell you what it actually means. So as I mentioned, the Higher Education Research Commercialization Intellectual Property Framework states very clearly in that what they are seeking is a balanced position between universities and industry. They've come up with the framework, but also templates of agreements that they have, that they expect university and industry to use as guidelines in their engagements. But what's very important is that last statement that, in most cases, the ownership will be the organization that created the IP, which will most likely be the organization that performed the work, which is the university. Now, that is not going to sit well with a lot of industry partners, but what they will want is access. So even if an industry partner does not own IP that's created, they're going to want to make sure that they get access, potentially commercial access. And what's different from some prior centers where the administrator of that center, the lead organization, in some cases would own the IP. The recommendation now is that it's the creator of the IP that owns it and makes it available to the other participants. Again, my slides will be sent to everyone. I'll clean this up so everyone can see it. But what's important is there is a framework that's being sent out through the ARC, initiated through the ARC, on how business is done between universities and industry. And we just all need to be conscious that this is something that may become mandatory at this point. It's guidelines, but it's good guidelines for us to work towards with our industry partners and educating them on the framework also. So when I mean IP as part of the framework, it's important to think about background IP and the expectations of that. In most cases, background IP is put into a project because it's anticipated to be useful in that project to create new project IP. What we want to avoid is what I call a land grab, which is where a university puts in everything under the sun, thinking, oh, I might get some value from this. It actually does not work in your favor. Keep it very focused on the projects and what you want to create out of those projects, and keep everything else out of it, because the researchers will want to use their background IP in other areas and not potentially have it locked up in the project, where there's usually an option to that background IP to use with project IP. As I said, with project IP, there are a number of different models. As I said, the centrally owned, decentrally commercialized, I think, is going to go by the wayside. And each party takes ownership, which is model 2, because that framework I just mentioned is the one where I think it's going to become more prevalent. And then you've got a combination where the benefit is just shared between the parties, but it's still usually going to be the party that produced that intellectual property in the first place. Data use is something that's becoming more prevalent in certain centers, especially where there's artificial intelligence or machine learning used. And data is something that needs to be thought about early, because it's quite prolific in a lot of the research projects. So it will get used quite widely, and it's what you can do to ensure that it's used widely, but that the benefit goes to the creator. If you have any questions on that, I would suggest that sort of detail would come out if your your training center or research hub is successful. And then we could have further discussions about that in a follow-up session. And then something else to consider is access if a member exits, because a member may have contributed substantial background IP for which project IP is currently being created. They cannot just walk away and take their toys with them. You have to have the ability to continue to use that background IP with that center to ensure that those outcomes are being met. Okay, so is the IP value? A lot of people don't like this because no, it's not valuable until the industry partner says it's valuable. There has to be impact. There has to be translation. Translation's mentioned a number of times by Rob and Liz. It's absolutely critical that value is seen from what gets created. And it's your job to set the foundation for how the industry partner could then further use what gets created in their business or in their further research and development to get it to a TRL that's at a later stage, or gets it to a point where a new CRC, a CRCP, a linkage, another program is established to take it further. But setting those foundations is absolutely critical so the industry partner understands that there's value in the future. Because at this point in time, you're talking about very early stage conceptual products and low TRL levels. So I'll end here just thinking about the path to market. And again, it's how I described with the mining industry. They might need it, but they might not make it. They might be a user, but they might also not be the one that pays for it. It could be a subsidiary of that company. So it's understanding all of the participants, not just the participants in the center, to foreshadow where things might go in the future to ensure that you're not locking yourself into an area or a box that you can't get out of. That means that your technology isn't going to be translated. It's ensuring that you have the right partners for translation and that party that's going to manufacture it, make it, sell it to the parties that need it. And that's it. I know we've got the format's changed this year, Rob. I think we've got questions at the very end. Is that correct?
It's my unmute button. Yep, but the intention is to have questions at the absolute end, noting that if you become exhausted and depart early, then we'll farm any questions for you over to you for answering later on.
It's only 8:30. I'm okay.
Oh, good. Excellent. All right. Thank you very much for that presentation. Thank you, Yara. Much appreciated. So next up, we have presentations by our Centre Directors. So first off is Professor Sally Gras, who is our Director for the Research Hub for Digital Bioprocesses. Sally.
Thanks, Robert. Can I just confirm you can hear me and see my slides? Yes.
Yep, I can do both of those.
Thank you. So we can progress them. A bit about my background for those of you who haven't met me. I'm a biologist and a chemical engineer at the University of Melbourne, and I led my first hub, the ARC Dairy Innovation Hub, in the first round, or was awarded in the first round. And then I'm now, as Robert said, leading the ARC Digital Bioprocess Development Hub. And that's a very new centre. You can see we don't have a logo yet. And so in the very early stages, and I'll draw on both of my experiences in sharing some tips and tricks for you today. So when Liz and Robert approached me about this, I thought that there were really 3 key words that summarise the ITRP scheme that I think are worth keeping in mind as people are constructing applications. And the first is it's about a sector-based program, so whole of sector. I'll return to that in a moment. That it's about transformation. We've heard that a little bit so far, and it's also about collaboration. And if we look at the scheme objectives and outcomes, and these were put up initially as well on the early slides, you see sector appears here a couple of times. And certainly if you're coming from a scheme like the linkage scheme, all of this fits under the linkage program, of course, but there are distinctions, really big distinctions between the ITRP and, say, a linkage project, because you've got multiple projects, and both Liz and Robert talked to that as well, multiple projects that are integrated. And it's the whole of sector approach. You're trying to make an impact on the sector. That's quite distinct from if you're trying to make a smaller scale impact for 1 or 2 industry partners and just locally within industry. The second key word is around transformation. And you can see here in the objectives around industrial transformation priorities, but also the type of transformation that we're trying to achieve through the program. So economic, commercial and social transformation. And of course, a lot of the things we do are collaborative, but it really underpins the ITRP scheme, collaboration with industry and collaboration between university researchers as well. There are a couple of other keywords I think that are worthwhile picking up on the objectives. The first of these in blue is really a subset of the transformation. So using those cutting edge research technologies to achieve transformation, and the fact that the scheme has real international ambitions as well. So we want to see, the scheme aims to see national benefits, but the idea is also international reach. So investment coming into the scheme, but also your international networks and making sure that we're internationally competitive, both our researchers, but also our industry as well. So I'll draw on each of these keywords and go through some of the things that I think are important and that I've thought about in writing ITRP applications. And the first of these around the sector is thinking, well, what is the need and the opportunity at a sector level, not just for 1 or 2 partners. And in our first hub, this was the ARC Dairy Innovation Hub, there were a series of economic and environmental pressures. And many of these still exist today, of course, as well. But there were domestic and export market threats. But this was countered by a huge opportunity around growing Asian demand for Australian dairy products. And so we set up a hub that had research that was going to address those challenges and to really try and stop the constraint on manufacturing and to make the most of this Asian demand. And that was around the transformational processing technologies and also products, And you can see here that it was to enhance productivity and growth and sustainability. So things that can really transform an industry. And we were able to, over the course of that hub, document the benefits through case studies and return on investment calculations. In the second hub that I'm now leading, the opportunity and the situation was different. So the problem was around digital innovation and productivity and competitiveness. So in this case, the pharmaceutical industry, and this is not just the Australian pharmaceutical industry, but actually the pharmaceutical industry worldwide, lags behind other industries in terms of the digital maturity. And so that was the challenge for the industry. And again, it's balanced again by an opportunity. And here it was around optimized manufacturing processes, so improved yields and faster and more flexible processes. So in this case, our hub is set up to try and transform biopharmaceutical manufacturing, and it's about international growth opportunities, making the industry internationally competitive. But also, as the images show you, we know now more than ever before that our supply chains are important and our sovereign capabilities are important too. So the hub aims to address this as well. So in your own applications, of course, it's going to be important to identify both the need and the opportunity. You also need to think about which partners you're going to choose and how many of those partners, because it's a sector, it's likely to be more than one partner, and statistically, that's certainly the case. And you need to think about what type, and both Liz and Robert talked about how they could be not only industry partners, it could be government, it could be industry bodies, not-for-profits, and size. And certainly my own experience is around larger companies, but it could be SMEs and across the size range. And do they represent the sector? This is really important. So how can they help enable change as well? So is it their manufacturing facilities, and as in the case of both of my hubs, is it the research expertise they have? Is it the products or the processes? What is it that they have that they will help enable transformation, and how are they going to benefit from that transformation as well? And by thinking about this, you can piece together all the jigsaw pieces to come up with your proposal. I think there are a number of different models for ITRPs, and I think that's worthwhile considering too. And certainly talking to other directors from other hubs, there's lots of different ways of constructing these. And my two hubs have had different models as well. The first hub was around bringing together competitive companies. And this is perhaps a somewhat unusual model. But what we had was 7 dairy manufacturing companies that collectively processed around 70% of the milk at that time and produced around 65% of the dairy products. And they were working jointly together through Dairy Innovation Australia, who are an industry body. And then it was through interaction with the industry body that the hub was constructed, and that drew researchers from the University of Melbourne and University of Queensland. And that particular hub initially had an open innovation model, which is when everything is pre-competitive. And so everything was shared. Now, in the course of our hub, things changed in the dairy industry. There was a lot of consolidation, a lot of restructuring. And so we actually modified our model throughout the course of that hub, and it became a mixed model that was not quite as open and pre-competitive as we started out with. And that is perhaps more usual structure. Another type of structure you might consider is complementary companies. And an example of how you might structure this is considering companies from across the supply chain, shown simplistically just here. Or it might be that you're choosing companies that service different parts of the same market and so have a different focus in that way. And you can bring in, as well as we've talked about before, industry together with non-profit, government and other bodies, like we did with Dairy Innovation Australia. The second keyword that I talked about, transformation, I think you need to have a vision of what success is going to look like for your centre or your hub. And that's going to be success for the sector as a whole, remembering that you're wanting to have that impact on the sector. What does it mean collectively for your partners? So as a hub, the group of people together in a hub, what does success look like collectively together? For each of them individually, they're going to have their own needs and it will look different. And then there's the field, of course, as well, because you're wanting to progress the field in terms of the research, either the science, the engineering, or whatever the field is. And it needs to be a mixture of both short and long-term goals. You've also got to define your cutting edge technologies, identify those. In our dairy hub, it was a lot was around membrane technology and how this could be implemented. But that's just one example, and it sits underneath this business need that Robert's spoken about. You also need to think about how to measure success. You probably won't have space to put this in your application, but I think it's worthwhile thinking about it in advance and talking to your partners about it. And in our first hub, we talked about the uptake of technology, the return on investment and impact case studies. And of course, there's the more traditional things like the graduates, employment, training, and university metrics like papers and presentations. But having that in mind can be really useful in developing your application. You also need to think a bit about the pathway to that end point. So if you know what success looks like, how will you get there? And I'd encourage you to think broadly. And people often talk about patents and spin-outs, but depending on the industry, there might be more appropriate ways of translating your research. And that could be through licensing and contracts. And certainly in our first hub, this was really true, that the licensing and contracts were a really important route for transformation. And I'll give you a snapshot of what that looked like here, from the science and engineering over on the left-hand side through to the productivity and growth outcomes for the industry on the right-hand side here. And you can see all the different components of how that translation occurred, from generating the research outcomes, the analysis of data and so on in the dairy hub, that then got translated through workshops and pilot trials into industry through scale up and one-to-one implementation studies and business studies, and then through into the industry outcomes, things like the reduced waste, increased sustainability, and new products and new markets and new customers. The other thing that I think is important to acknowledge, though, is that all of this translation is really dynamic. And so things change. I've already talked about how in the course of our hub, the companies changed and there were consolidation in the industry and restructure. You can also have things like market fluctuations and trade agreements that change the focus. The pandemic, we know, changed supply chains, but also priorities in the way people do business. And there can be factors like environmental changes and drought, depending on the sector that you're talking about. So as a result, I think you need to consider the mechanisms by which you're going to translate your research and transform the sector, but also consider how you will review these from time to time as changes happen, because they will happen. The third of my keywords was around collaboration. And I've taken here a quote from the Australian Research Council website. And it says, research hubs engage Australia's best researchers. And I encourage you to think really broadly about what that means. We have some fantastic researchers in industry partners. And so think about all of the PIs that you can engage from across your partners, and how this can develop them as well as your internal university researchers. Think about researchers across universities, across different research organisations within Australia, and of course your international links too. And a big part of developing and submitting an ITRP application is your research support team too. So who are the people going to be from your university or from other universities as part of the team that are supporting you? And that's going to be your research office. It's also your legal team, having a good legal person to discuss things with in advance, business development team, and support staff that are going to help you to progress it, because it's certainly not a one-person journey. And having thought about all that, then you need to think about, well, what solutions will you develop to enable the transformation and reach the end goal? And again, a quote from the ARC is that you're looking for strategic outcomes that cannot be realised independently of each other. And so I'd encourage you, you've heard this before, but I'd encourage you to workshop projects. I think it's really great way, and probably quite time-effective way to get to the point of what it is you really want to cover, and to develop the team so that they are cross-disciplinary and cross-institute, and who's really the best person to work on each project. And ideally what you're looking for is two-way learning with industry as well, so that you're learning from them and vice versa, and that it can be really synergistic across the project and across the parties. You've also got to think about how you work together, and we've touched on governance already a few times. And there's a lot of different models out there, but some of the common things you perhaps need to think about when you're constructing your model is who's going to be represented or who should be represented, and the roles that they will play, being realistic as well as to what their availability is to play those roles and what you're asking them to do in that governance structure. Also thinking about information flow and reporting. And how that's going to happen. And of course, whenever you have information, you need to think about confidentiality. What will you protect? What will you remove? How will you treat confidential information of both the background information, but the project information that's being generated? Within the governance structure, you need to think about who's going to be offering advice, or what structures provide advice and which structures provide decision-making, and how will they do so? And what are the checks and balances and the external advisors that could come from across the sector or from scientific background. And this just gives you an idea from the first hub we had. This was midway through, where we had Fiala Growth Centre being one of our chairs of one of our committees. This was a two-tier structure with an industry advisory committee and a hub management committee. But you know, these vary in terms of structure, and so that's just to give you an idea. And finally, what I'd like to talk about is the submission stage and beyond. So as you're constructing the grant, I think it's really important to review together with your team early and multiple times, and to use the assessment criteria. You've got those there, you know what the panel will be considering, and that's an important assessment to go through as you review your proposal. Another big thing is around managing expectations as well, around timelines. And Robert talked about the starting dates and, you know, the timelines that might be applicable. You need to communicate these to your all of your partners and all of your investigators. I mean, check these dates as well against the ARC. But this award timeline, you need to be really aware of that. Internal approvals are also critical. So, and that's at every party, because at another university, you may have heads of department or heads of faculty that need to sign off on contributions, and you need to know what these are in advance. If it's your partner organisation, you need to understand, do they need to go above country? Is there a particular window when they can get sign off? And do they need to involve legal teams from other countries? So for instance, if you're having to involve legal teams from the US, that can get quite tricky. And so you need to know ahead of time what that process is and the time that needs to be allocated to it, or else you might find that you can't bring all your parties on board. A second part of the timeline as well that's often not discussed, and I've added my own little estimates along here at the bottom, is the post-award timeline. So the ARC has told me that typically it takes around 12 months to finalise agreements after award. And so this is really important for flagging this with your partners, that it is a journey along all of these timelines. And then you've got hiring staff and students after that too. So it's quite long timeframes. And that's important for your CIs too to understand, because if they wish to carry someone within the university system to then have them within the hub, there could be a funding gap. And so it's important from their side of things, but also from your industry partners, if they have particular timeframes and business years in which cash contributions need to be made as well. And given the long timelines, I'd also suggest that it's really important to get started. And I'm sure you're already talking to your partners, you're already looking at how you can work with them. But once you've submitted your proposal and had a good sleep and a good rest, what I'd encourage you to do is to think about how you can get started, say, with contracts, with research students, with workshops, to things to keep the momentum going whilst you're, first of all, waiting for the outcomes, and then finalising agreements and moving on to hire staff and students. So hopefully that's useful. And yeah, I'll bring it back to the three keywords that I think are really important for every application to consider. You know, whether you're targeting the sector, how are you going to have transformation, and how you're going to collaborate as part of that program. And Robert, back to you.
Thanks, Sally. Thanks for that excellent presentation. I think, yeah, I know there were many key messages there, but the main one for me is plan for change. It may not be in your application, but plan early that how you're going to run it and how your partners are going to all deal with it. Okay, on to our next speaker. And for our next one, we have Professor Lauren Spiegel, who is the Director of our Training Centre for Cell and Tissue Engineering Technology. And I believe this is your second one as well, Lawrence?
First.
Oh, your first one. Lucky first. Excellent. On.
Yeah. So I'll start sharing my screen. Let me just make sure I get PowerPoint running.
That's always a job.
My slides are not as pretty as Sally's, so I apologize for that. But thanks for the invitation to speak to everyone today. It's a fantastic opportunity. I certainly myself attended 2 of these in previous years. So as Robert mentioned, I'm the director for the ARC Training Centre for Cell and Tissue Engineering Technologies. 2 main university partners. This is a training centre, so it's very different to a hub, and I'll try and outline some of the kind of key differences. We were established in January 2021, and following on the theme of change, we're still engaging with new POs. So you can anticipate a lot of churn if you are successful in getting one of these ITRP applications funded. So a little bit about me. I am a physical chemist by training, but I've been working in the material science and specifically biomedical material science for about 23 or 24 years. We are a pretty large centre. I'm probably not the largest training centre, but we have about 23 projects, 23 industry and training partners, 21 students, PhD, 4 master's students, 33 CIs. And you can see the range of partners that we have in the slide there. There's a range of national and international partners. There's a range of, they all belong to the sector, and that's reiterating the whole notion of the sector and how important it is for your centre or hub to represent the sector. That we took that really very much to heart. So we have startup companies, multinationals, all the way through to supply chain and logistics companies collaborating in the centre, as well as contract manufacturers, large corporates, and as I said, startup companies or small companies. There's a couple of other things I'd say. Firstly, I concur 100% with everything that Chiara and Sally have already talked about. We are basically a non-competitive centre, so there is no 2 companies in this centre that directly compete with each other. Well, there are some that compete with each other, but they're in the sense that they're all manufacturing engineering firms, but they are not. They represent more a kind of training partner than someone that we're actively doing research collaboration with. So Sally talked about the need and identifying your niche. You know, you have to start from where the people you think will be involved or you would like to collaborate with. What are they well known for? What are they really good at? The science is important in these applications. We are a training centre, so we have a lot of focus on the training program and making a really excellent training program and making it highly industry relevant. So complementary capability at yours and other eligible organisations. Use the industry sector reports to help you identify the need, because they can be very helpful. And look to industry partners for what they need, because that's tremendously important. You would like, in an ideal world, for the research that you're doing collaboratively together to be key to their business, if you can. We could cite both government and industry growth centre publications in our application. So in our case, that's medical and pharmaceutical, medical technologies and pharmaceutical. And that training set, that industry growth centre is called MTP Connect. We did a lot of business intelligence gathering through just talking to industry partners or potential industry partners. What are their needs? You need a market, importantly. There will be no transformation if there is no market to purchase products and services. So that needs to be an important thing. So you can look at market reports, look at what are growth parts of sectors, look at growth rates and size markets, and try and build elements of that into your application. The importance of the solutions to Australia is very important as well, and you need to bring that out, because you might have a range of international and national companies, but Australia needs to derive benefit from the work that you do in your training centre. Plan to track impact. You need to work on that before you even start doing the work, and figure out how you're going to measure impact, because then you can write a fantastic story like Sally did for her first dairy hub around your actual impact and transformation of the industry sector. So finding the first few industry partners. I mean, my experience, I worked in CSIRO for 16 years and I've been at Monash for 8. I already had a network of industry partners and collaborators that I could go to get some thinking. But make use of your BD managers in your own institutions to introduce you to as many people as possible. As I said, use the industry growth sector reports to identify key players that you can go and talk to in the sector. Ask them what training they're missing in graduates. What would they like to see in a training program, and help them and engage with them to be part of your training program if you can. Talk to them about the key challenges that the capabilities within the university partners can address for them. What keeps them awake at night? What do they worry about? What are they missing in their portfolio, etc. And then think about value proposition. HDR students, what's the value proposition to them? What's the value proposition for your university partners and your industry partners, and the value proposition of funding these very large investments by the Australian government. Very important. And then thinking about capability and who you'd like to bring into your proposed centre to help deliver solutions and train the HDRs. The way I worked is I gathered a few CIs that already had strong industry networks and used them to leverage industry partners into the centre as well as my own. You know, you've got to find that complementary expertise and capability that will help the centre deliver key outcomes, and be able to articulate the vision and mission of the proposed centre in your application. And you will need that to engage with all sorts of stakeholders, including your own university or eligible org. Diversity in the leadership is something we really focused on, and diversity in the CIs, and we don't have very much control over the PIs, but we like to have diversity in PIs as well. But we focused very, very carefully on that. A good mix of senior, mid-career and early career researchers. and you're using the centre as an opportunity to train them as well through mentoring from very experienced industry engaging academics and other researchers. The five key personnel are critical. They're going to be your leadership team, very important. You need to start talking to your department, your school, your faculty, your research office, central university leadership to gauge the level of support and to get some additional financial support, which was something we did. And you need a support staff team to help you get the proposal over the line. I had a small team of people that had different roles within the bid preparation or the proposal preparation. It's very helpful in getting the budgets right, helping you with business development and other partnering activities. And importantly, having commercial discussions with POs, because the university academics, it's not our role to have commercial discussions. So you need teams, people on your team that will do that and that know exactly what the IP positions, for example, are going to be for your eligible org. Gather resources to write the application because it's a mammoth effort. The 10 pages is one thing, but you also have all the eligibility, making sure people are eligible, getting the budgets right, doing the partnering. Even just getting your PIs in RMS can be a challenge sometimes. Have someone helping you that's really good with people, very efficient and able to get everyone on board and eligible. Everyone's got to contribute to the writing, but the key personnel are really key to that. There's a lot of work to do. Articulate the training program clearly and carefully in the proposal. That's the value add to the HDRs, and also giving them an industry network. That's very important. Have your industry partners contribute to the training program. Make sure you have your governance lined up. Understand how important governance is in centres like this, and use best practice to define how you work. And Liz and Robert gave a very similar governance structure that, for example, we have in our centre. So get as many of the wider team involved in the running of the centre, early career researchers in particular, and you will need to understand a little bit about the legal frameworks. Obviously, you won't be having legal discussions, but there's common frameworks for centres and hubs that ours is, for example, ours is a head agreement with a range of schedules that are basically the project agreements associated with the individual projects, and of which there's 23 and probably will be 25 by the end. And be aware of data management requirements, particularly if you're working with internationals. That's also very important. Find a good manager is really, really, really important to deliver on the proposal. Try and get the legal agreements drafted and get them out to the POs for discussion and feedback. Work closely with the research office. We had not just dedicated to us, but we had someone in the research office that helped with everything to get establishment underway. Work with your BD managers and commercialization teams, and everyone's expectations needs to be calibrated, and this has been mentioned a couple of times. IP is always going to be there. The discussions around IP, universities will have a perspective, industry will have a perspective, and you've got to manage everyone's expectations so that you actually get transformation and translation into markets. Communication's critical. Visit your POs, your PIs, engage with them as much as you can, and keep them involved in the centre and the activities in the centre. Invite them to your annual retreats, etc., your annual meetings. There'll be some really strongly engaged, some less strongly engaged, and some less engaged, but you need to work hard to keep everyone delivering on KPIs, and keep up the internal messaging within your university, because you need. It's a big investment for the university as well. So they're a key stakeholder. We would probably do a few things differently, I think. Second time around, we probably would have run the participants agreement and the project agreements at the same time with everyone, which means very well-defined projects, milestones, outcomes. And it's a lot of work to do, particularly if you're in a training centre that has 23 projects. But the more you can streamline that and make it happen faster, the better. So basically, move as fast as you can, and you'll need help to do that. We had a lot of university leadership changes, so you're always having to re-message all the time. And you need the messages to go high, you know, in the university, not just kind of sit at the faculty level. Try not to start a centre in the middle of a pandemic. That would be useful. Wouldn't try and do that again. It was just unfortunate timing for us. And it delayed things. It certainly had an impact on how fast we could go. Key advice, centre manager is critical. Get one early and get a really good one, particularly in a training centre. And they will have to be able to manage a lot of different things. So that you need a really flexible and very multitasking person. You probably have to find new participants, new CIs, new PIs. That needs to be managed carefully. Get to know everyone in the centre. Get together as often as you can, face to face. It will be critical to feeling and working like a centre. Be persistent. Get as much feedback as you can from your stakeholders. Have a good system for tracking KPIs. You'll need to report on them. IP's attention. You'll need to traverse that and try and plan for impact tracking using, you know, the right sort of benchmarks. I think I should leave you there, but just to, again, a little bit about our centre. It's 2 universities, 6 faculties, and it has 4 themes that traverse engineering efficiencies through to value chain and optimize commercialization outcomes. So again, just at my university, there's 4 faculties, business all the way through to pharmacy. So they can be quite complex things to manage, particularly if you have a cohort of PhD students, which we do, enrolled in 4 different faculties with all different rules. You'll have to manage all that sort of thing as well. So I'll leave it there.